Welcome to the Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. I'm Maggie Montemuro, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Savvy Ladies. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it into the chat box. If you're joining us by phone, you can email your question to info@savvyladies.org. Today's presenter is Sabra Sasson, founder and principal of Sabra Law Group, PLLC, a mediation and law practice that offers legal and mediation services. Sabra is an attorney and mediator who handles the legal aspects of major life transitions. For couples embarking on marriage, Sabra helps them protect accumulated assets and create a plan for building assets, wealth, and valuables in the future. She enables her clients to have open communication and effectively manage their finances. Sabra is currently writing a book to guide and empower couples through the process of uncoupling. Thanks for being with us, Sabra, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to have everyone here with us today. Trying to figure out the slides, so give me a second. Great. So today I'm talking about the 3 mistakes to avoid before tying the knot so that you can have and live your happily ever after. I wanted to first thank you all for being here because I know that there is so many other places where you could be during this hour of the day. And I wanted to thank you for investing in yourself and being here to hear this, what I consider a valuable information. So what we're going to learn today, what we're going to cover, here's the agenda, is the number 1 topic that must be talked about before tying the knot. The TLC conversation that engaged couples aren't having and should, and how to bring up the subject with your loved one. So first, I'm going to ask you to turn off your cell phone, your emails, close your other browsers, and really give yourself the time and the attention for being here today, since you took the time out of your day to be here. And of course, as an attorney, I have to give the legal disclaimer that all of the information provided during this webinar is for information purposes only. There's no attorney-client relationship created. Legal advice should only be provided through direct contact with an attorney who is fully apprised of the specific facts and circumstances of your case. So first, I want to take you on a little journey. So imagine that you are in a loving relationship. There are no secrets between the two of you, no taboo topics or subjects between the two of you. And even if there are tough subjects or things that are embarrassing to share, you feel really safe to bring it up in that relationship. Talk about it with your partner, no matter what. Does that sound like the kind of relationship that you have now? I hope so. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a little bit about myself, and then I'll get into more of the content. So I believe in love, romance, and happily ever after. And my mission is that I believe that every engaged couple needs to have the loving conversation, or TLC for short, before getting married so that you can have the lasting, loving, and harmonious marriage. For me, more than 10 years ago, I thought I had found my happily ever after. I had met a man that I dated for a while. We fell in love, got engaged, we got married. And it was my lifelong dream as a kid, to grow up and meet someone, get married, and have a family, like a lot of people have. Unfortunately, it didn't work out so great for me. I did graduate law school, was working as an attorney, I got married, but my marriage didn't work out. And I went through a horrible, horrible divorce, which was actually what led me into working in this area of law. So what I learned from my experience is that there are things that even as a lawyer that I wish I knew then that I know now. So back then when I got married, I was one of the biggest opponents you could probably ever meet about prenups. I didn't believe in them. I felt that, it offended me. It wasn't something that sounded romantic. I didn't think that it was something that I needed. I believed that you were either all in or you're not. And if you weren't all in, then why even bother getting married? So when I got married, I was all in. And we did not have a prenuptial agreement. And what I've learned since then is that sometimes life just doesn't work out the way you would plan to. And divorce happens to bring out the absolute worst in people. So today I'm now a huge proponent of prenuptial agreements, and here's why. When I work with my clients, I talk with them about these documents, and what I'm not doing is I'm not planning for their future breakup. Instead, what we're planning is for their whole future together. It's an opportunity for this couple to talk about the things that are tough, that are difficult, challenging, and scary. We just don't talk about money. Nobody talks about money, and we don't talk about the real important things in life, like having children and how to raise the children. So for me, when I decided to get married, I thought we were just, we were in love, so we would figure everything out as we went along. And I just trusted that we would be able to work out the tough stuff. But it didn't work out for me that way. What I do today is I really get in the trenches and I work with hundreds of different couples who are going through separation and divorce. And I've learned a lot more, not only about what I should have known, but what they should have known before tying the knot in order to save their marriage and even have a more harmonious relationship. So I want to share with you from the depths of my practice, from my business, because I believe that there's no better person to help you live happily ever after than with your divorce attorney. So I developed a process to work with couples and help them feel more comfortable talking about the uncomfortable. We talk about how you each manage money, do the savings, is there credit card debt? We really look into everything. And it can really be an inspirational conversation. I find that most people find it very enlightening. They walk out of the meeting and they get to know each other on a really deeper level in a way that they probably never talked about before. We talk about how they're currently managing their money and discuss ideas on how they could do it better in the future. And it could be a lot of fun, actually, to realize that how much each of them have worked so hard and created the financial portfolio that they each created before they even met each other, and then talk about the power of their joint efforts. So I know some couples don't like to discuss that and instead want to keep their finances separate, and that's okay. We talk about family, we talk about children, we talk about other things that may be more fun. But wouldn't you like to know how you each feel about these things before you actually tie the knot? So today I'm going to share with you, again, about the top 3 mistakes that people who are really smart and in love before they tie the knot so that you can live happily ever after. So again, just imagine yourself in a great relationship, in a loving marriage, and imagine the life that you can build together. Just take a moment, look at these pictures. I hope it brings up something for you. I believe that every engaged couple needs to have the TLC conversation. I call it the loving conversation. It's a conversation that I believe every couple needs to have before they tie the knot. In my experience, most couples don't really talk about the important and crucial topics prior to marriage. I think they're caught up in the whole Hollywood idea of just falling in love and everything is just going to be fantastic. So I definitely thought that way too, and it didn't work out for me. Unfortunately, it sets yourselves up for disappointment, arguments, fights, with someone that you really think that you know and love, and then find yourself in a marriage that you didn't envision it would be. Imagine if you just took a few minutes or some time to invest in yourselves to have the hard conversations now. And really, that's all I'm talking about, is just having a conversation and getting better at having those conversations. We don't talk about money, and we don't talk about finances, and we don't talk about the shameful credit card debt that we may have incurred. And I know it's really uncomfortable. The problem is that when you make this decision to get married and spend the rest of your life with someone, if you can't share the tough things with them now, the thoughts and feelings you have now that you're holding back is just setting yourself and your relationship up for disaster. And it's going to make it tough to go through life together, to deal with life's ups and downs and challenges that inevitably happen throughout your lifetime. So let's get into the stuff and the reason why you're here today. Now, one of the first statistics that a lot of people think about is 50% of marriages fail. And that just totally sucks. And I don't wish it wasn't that way. And I think that by being here today, you're giving yourself on the side where you're more likely to have a successful marriage because you're going in with your eyes wide open. And if you can get around to having these tough conversations, it'll definitely make things easier in the future. So why do 50% of the marriages fail? From my experience and from the couples that I work with who are going through divorce, most of the time it's over money. Money is the number one reason for marriages failing. And there are plenty of other reasons: stress, job loss, there's children with disabilities, put a lot of stress on relationships. And sometimes there's even differences in religious beliefs that develop over time, and that can put a stress on a marriage. So, what is the loving conversation? So, this is a place where the two of you get really real about the stuff that you just don't want to talk about. And I find that when people come to somebody like me as a neutral person who can talk with you and be in the same room, it kind of diffuses whatever emotional stuff that you might bring to the table. So it's talking about these tough subjects: money, finances, debt, income, identifying how you each manage money. Are one of you a spender? Is one of you a saver? And how could that impact your relationship and your marriage in the future? So if you know now what money type you are, you can make plans together while you're in love and before you get married, so everything's planned out so that you manage your finances well, even after marriage. We talk about children. Do you want it? How do you raise them? There's a lot of issues that go into a loving conversation to have before getting married. And the only time I really hear about people having these conversations, maybe in certain religions, they have either you go to your minister or rabbi and they may help you have those conversations. I know for me, I did that and it wasn't enough to get us really ready because they didn't go deep enough into the conversation. So I'm just curious, for those of you that are familiar with using the group chat, and only if you're comfortable, you don't have to, but I'd love to see how you currently feel. Do you believe that prenuptial agreements are only for the rich and the famous, or that they're like you're planning for a breakup in the future? Do you believe that prenuptial agreements are unromantic, or they're just not a good idea? Why even bother? So I'd love to hear, if you just take a moment, I'd love to see what your thoughts are. So I'm seeing a couple of comments that they believe that this is only for the rich and the famous. Just if you have a lot of assets, that this may be right for you. Any other comments? Just taking a look. So we have a no. Prenups are perceived in religious communities as an attack on marriage. Interesting. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. So, and this one is just a question of putting out there. You don't have to answer it. Is it possible that a prenuptial agreement could be a good idea for you? So again, if you want to take a moment to respond to that. Great. A couple of people responded that they actually have a prenuptial agreement. Wonderful. So here might be a picture of what it might look like. You have a married couple. They seem like they're dressed beautifully. And then you have this legal document, contract, prenuptial agreement. And I picked out one with hearts because I really do think it's coming from a loving, caring place. So when might prenups be a good idea? And some of this may be things that you're already thinking. It may be a great idea to protect your stuff, or maybe to help hash out the hard conversations about finances. Like, what if somebody loses their job or becomes disabled at some point in the future? It can also address things like if you're planning for children or you can't conceive, what other options might the two of you consider? Do you have embryos that you might want to use or not use in the future? And how do you deal with the challenges that that can come up in life. So again, it's really just a conversation, and I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that you have to sign a prenuptial agreement. I think it's important that every engaged couple has the loving conversation, that at least there's a conversation so you both know where your head's at and where you're both headed with regard to your marriage and expectations of one another. So some of you might think that that prior slide might seem a little bit weird. You know, here you have this gorgeous couple, they're dressed up, and then you got this contract there, and it just doesn't seem really, really fun. That's for sure, right? I get that. People talk about the dreaded prenup. It's definitely not as fun as finding your wedding venue, choosing a DJ and flowers, buying your wedding gown. You know, those are definitely fun things to do. But what I see people thinking about is that they're planning for their marriage, they put so much time and effort into it, and the reality is that when you get married, it's not just about love, because you are signing a contract. You have a contract with the state, and if you get married in New York, for instance, you have a marriage license that the state gives you to permit you to get married. And by doing that, you're buying into, I'm putting that in quotes, you're buying into all of the statutes and laws governing your marriage. And there are laws, like one of them, for instance, you can file a joint tax return as a married couple. That's one of the things. You also get the benefit of being on each other's health insurance policy. I know that that's helped some clients of mine where one spouse wasn't able to qualify or get medical insurance, but once they were married, they weren't allowed to be denied medical coverage. So there are a lot of benefits to being married, but there's also a financial aspect with regard to being married. And that's why I have this next slide up there. So when I work with my clients, I tell them, you know, you're Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or Mr. and Mrs. whatever your last name is. And that's the name of your company. You're the CEOs of Mr. and Mrs. fill in your last name. And the reason why I say that is because now you're creating a new business venture together. Going to be joining forces, living together. The CEOs are each of you, whoever you are that make up your couple. It could be Mr. and Mrs., Mr. and Mr., Mrs. and Mrs., or Mr. and Mrs. today. And your brick and mortar for your business is where you're living, where you set up home. It could be a house, an apartment, wherever it is that the two of you decide to live. And your business assets are your furnishings and your money, whatever it is that you bring into the relationship. And just as I hope that you wouldn't go into a business arrangement without having a shareholders agreement, if you were to start a new business together, if you were to start a restaurant together with partners and getting investments and contributions from your different partners, I hope that you would not go into that without a shareholders agreement. So similarly, I think it's important to have a shareholders agreement in your marriage, which I refer to as a TLC prenup. Another way of looking at it, wouldn't it be irresponsible and naive not to address the issue that 50% of marriages fail, right? So even if it's uncomfortable and seems unromantic to talk about these things, wouldn't it be easier to tackle it head on rather than just letting life play out and you deal with the tough stuff later? Just like you're planning your wedding day. Again, your wedding day is a day, and your wedding itself is maybe 4 to 6 hours of time. And people spend months, and some people spend a year planning for their wedding day. But what about the day after your wedding? What happens then? What if you took a little bit of time to do a little bit of planning on the type of marriage and life that you want to live with this person that you're in love with and excited to spend your rest of your life with? If you just spent a little bit of time, what difference might that make on the success or failure of your marriage? So if you think about prenups as something bad and just a way for your partner to keep money from you or vice versa, then yeah, I get it. It's definitely, that's not exciting. I don't think I'd want to talk with my partner about how they're going to keep stuff from me. But back in the day, you're right. Some of you had mentioned it. Back in the day, when prenups first came into the picture, they were used by a spouse to make sure that their soon-to-be spouse was not marrying them just for their money or family money and assets. And they wanted to make sure they're really marrying them for love. And that's where it was born out of. And so if you're getting married, you're probably getting married for love because you love one another and not because of the assets that you each bring into the marriage, right? And that's probably why people feel uncomfortable with it, because it feels like it's unromantic. It feels like it's just not the right thing. So again, I had mentioned before that marriage isn't just about love and romance. There is a financial aspect to it as well. You have to get permission from the state to get married. And the reason you do that is, again, if your marriage doesn't work out, you need to go to the state to get divorced. And what are they looking at? They're looking at all your money and finances. And the state is making those decisions for you. I'm a big proponent in taking control of your own money and your own assets, that you guys know exactly what's right and what's fair for you in terms of how you want to divide stuff up. Why would you want to have the state involved in telling you what to do with your money? Just like you would probably do a not life insurance, a last will and testament. So if you have children or money, you're probably going to have a last will and testament, again, because you're opting out of the state's statutes, which already provide for what happens with your stuff after you die. So why won't you plan for your stuff? Again, in the God forbid your marriage doesn't work out. I like to look at a prenuptial agreement as a life insurance policy. Just in case there's an accident, just in case you have a car accident, you have that life insurance policy. Except you don't have to pay for this every year. You just pay for it once and you just put it away. So today, prenups are becoming more and more prevalent. I'm seeing a lot more people come in and ask for a prenuptial agreement, and I'm seeing it for many different reasons. And maybe this will help shed some light and help see if perhaps it might be something of interest to you. What I've been seeing is that people are getting married later in life. So they've had more time working in the workforce, accumulating assets. Maybe they've started a business, they wrote a book, they're in the movies, or maybe they have children from a prior relationship. Or they were married once before and they have children from a prior relationship. So they want to protect those children. They want to make sure that they're still providing for those children. Or maybe there's a spouse that they're still paying spousal support for a certain period of time. Wouldn't it be nice to know about that before you get married? So if you're going to spend a lot of time accumulating assets and wealth, and then you're going to take a chance on love, taking a leap of faith and get married, and you don't know whether it's going to work out, and you got a 50-50 chance that it will, do you truly want to take a risk on all those years of all that work that you've done to build up whatever you have for the chance that your relationship might be your happily ever after? I know it sounds a little depressing, but again, I strongly believe that if you have these conversations ahead of time, you're going to put yourself on the other side of the equation, the side where your marriage is most likely to prevail. So hopefully, going back to my CEO analogy, you would never dream of going into a partnership with lots of assets, a house, or other assets without someone drawing up an agreement. Yet every single day, people in our country are getting married. They're getting into a business arrangement with each other without even knowing what's going on for the other person. And then we all wonder why there's a 50% divorce rate. So think about this. So you may be in a relationship with someone, maybe for a few years or maybe for only a year. Are you aware? Do you know? Have you talked about the credit card debt of your partner? Do they have a car loan or college loans or school loans? Do they own an apartment or a house? Do they owe money to anybody? Do you even know their FICO score? And if you knew that at the beginning of the relationship, do you know the status of those things today? So the loving conversation has nothing to do about being rich or famous, protecting your assets, but it has everything to do with keeping your marriage together and making sure that all of the information is shared. So you might be wondering, when did you well, I'm asking you, when did you last have that conversation? And if you don't know the answer to these questions about debts, about assets, about income, doesn't it lead to a rocky start in your relationship or in your future marriage together? So together we're going to look at the possibilities for where you currently are and look at the possibilities of what you could do when you join forces and what you could do together. It's like turning your relationship from a Buick into a Bugatti. I have a brother who loves cars, so I had to throw that in there. And essentially what I'm trying to say here is that you could take your relationship from being just average or being just like other people who go into the marriage and just hope and pray that they'll be able to make it through and that love will just keep them through. Or you can work really hard at the relationship, because relationships aren't easy, and you can create something really beautiful and shiny and loving and really have everything open and on the table. You really take care. You could see how that car was waxed and shined and cleaned, and any little scratch that comes up is addressed. So the same thing in your marriage, I would want for you, that if things come up, you'll be able to discuss it, iron it out, shine it up, and just make it look nice, so that you have the kind of relationship that other people might be envious of. So that's the top stuff about, it for people who have a lot of money and you're not sure if that might be right for you. Now, another question that comes up is, well, I don't know that I need a prenup because we don't have any assets. Well, a prenup is not just about protecting the assets you have now, and also to disclose whatever debts you might have, because you might not want to become responsible for your spouse's student loans or other debts that they may have accumulated. But a prenup is also a way to talk about and address family money or future inheritance, or even talk about planning for your future family. And I have a couple of client stories to share with you. So I'm not going to share names for anonymity, but I had a young woman who came to me, and she was really excited, in love with this man. She told me about how amazing and incredible he is. And we started to go into having the loving conversation together. And through our conversation, I learned that her husband-to-be was making about $1 million a year. She was making a fraction of that, maybe just breaking $100,000 a year, a decent salary. And when we started to talk about children and family, her answer was, of course we want to have children. We're planning on having several. Fantastic. But when I asked her what their plan was, or what her ideal dream would be in terms of raising any children that they have together, she gave me an answer, and I asked her if she had discussed it with him. She looked at me like, why am I even asking you this question, right? Well, she was really surprised, because I asked her to go home and speak with him about what her vision was when they have children. And the answer that he gave her was nothing that she ever would have imagined would have been his response. She thought for sure that she would agree with, or he would agree with her. She had wanted to stay home with the children and stop working for a few years, and he wasn't in agreement with that. So through my help and guidance, she was able to talk with him, and they came to an agreement. And her prenuptial, it was included in her prenuptial agreement. She did have one, and they worked out an arrangement where she could take a certain period of time off for each child that they would have before returning to work. So now they're married several years. They do have a little baby boy. He's adorable. And she is as happy as can be. She doesn't really think about the prenuptial agreement, but the fact that they went through and had that tough conversation before they even got married, planning for when or if they were going to have children in the future, was really helpful, because now they didn't have to have that really tough conversation that I'm sure may not have looked pretty, but they didn't have to have that conversation while she was pregnant, while she was expecting, or once the child was born, because they worked it all out ahead of time. So she was able to have a more pleasurable pregnancy, and she didn't have to bring that type of agitation to her pregnancy and to her baby boy that was born. So that's an example of how you can see that a prenup is very beneficial. I have another client who comes from, his family has a lot of assets, and they've accumulated a lot of wealth over the years, and of course been providing for their children and whatnot. But the parents have worked really hard for whatever they have accumulated. And for the parents, they were very much aware, of the statistic that 50% of marriages fail. And as much as they love their future daughter-in-law, that they were still worried, with the high rate of divorce, that this new child, the daughter-in-law, might be able to run off, so to speak, with the family money. And so that became a reason to have the prenuptial agreement, again, to make sure it's more of the traditional, that it's for the quote unquote rich and the famous, just to make sure that this woman is marrying him not for his money, and also it made it really clear, so there wasn't any question as to in the future. Of course, they're hoping the marriage works out, but if it doesn't, they don't have to deal with in the future that she might claim, oh wait, but I want some of that other money. That's not even going to become a question in the future, and it will actually, again, knock on wood, want their marriage to work out. But if it doesn't, everything's already worked out in the prenuptial agreement, doesn't have to be discussed, does not become part of the litigation in a divorce, and instead they can really just focus on the one asset, their children, if they should have any, that might be born of the marriage. So in that regard, it saves a lot of money in the future. If there were to be a divorce, there's no argument or fight over money or property or assets. Everything's already been determined. You look at the document and divide it up. It's easy. And then the only thing you need to talk about is the children, child support, visitation. So now we get on to my last point of what I wanted to teach you today. Is you might be wondering, I don't know if this is really right for us, and even if it is, how would I even go about bringing up the subject with my partner? You don't know how they're going to react. Are they okay with prenups? What's their opinion? Do they also see it as something that's not a positive? So I teach a workshop exactly on this. It's several steps involved, and what I'll teach you about today is the first step. So the first step is when do you bring up the subject of a prenuptial agreement? And again, this is just having a conversation. Doesn't mean that you're going to go ahead and do it. Doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily sign a prenup or have a prenup. You don't have to. But again, I invite you to consider having the loving conversation before you tie the knot. So when is the appropriate time to bring it up? The answer, now. Now is definitely better than later. Now is the perfect time. And if you're early in the relationship, that's really, really great, because you can start talking about your hopes, your fears for the future in a non-threatening way. But if you're late in the game and you're already in the wedding planning stage, that's great too, because you're already accustomed to talking about business decisions together, like how much you're going to spend on catering, or talking about how much you're going to spend on flowers and invitations. And so you've already started talking about and making business decisions together. So now you can start talking about your decision to go ahead with a prenuptial agreement in pretty much the same way. So my clients that are happily married swear by the practice of bringing up conversations like this early as possible. And if you want to talk about something that might have some charge and you keep avoiding it, you'll wind up paying for it later with interest for your lack of courage. So just also understand you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to know exactly all the pieces and exactly how you feel about things. It could just be the first step in building the foundation for healthy communication. Again, this is not an easy conversation to have, but if you look at it as practice, to have a tough conversation now, it'll be practice for making sure that in the future, all the important things that are on your mind are also on the table. So I'm going to invite you to suck it up, give yourself no more than a day or two from today, and just bring it up. It really doesn't take time. It just takes a deep breath. That's just one piece of the puzzle with regard to how to bring up the subject of a prenup. Now is the best time. So we already talked about that. So now that you're clear about the 3 mistakes to avoid before tying the knot, and now you understand the benefits of the loving conversation and the loving contract, and having the conversation that you can have with your partner, the one that you chose to spend the rest of your life with, but you still might be wondering, is this really for me? Is this for us? And do we really need to put this in writing? So those are really tough conversations, and I get it. It's hard. It can be complicated. And then how do you bring it up? So I told you when to bring it up, but how do you bring it up? And what do I say? And how do you say the right things to your partner so that your partner doesn't get insulted or angry or think that you're now trying to take something out of the relationship? So what I'd like to offer you today is a free 15-minute discovery session with me, where I'll also share with you how to bring up the subject of a prenup, even where to bring it up, because that's another really crucial detail, and the way in which to bring it up. Usually the fee for a conversation like this with me would be $197. But because you're coming through Savvy Ladies, and I love the organization, I'm offering it to you complimentary to anyone who signs up by accessing my calendar. And if you look on this slide in the lower left corner, it's to schedule your free discovery session with me. And you can have access to my calendar by typing in your browser bit.ly/Savvy TLC, which you now know is the loving conversation. So again, 50% of marriages end in divorce. How many of them could have been saved if they only learned how to talk to each other? It's really not that hard. And what I want for you is that you give yourself to learn how, so that you have the option to have your happily ever after together rather than in a courtroom. So if you want to have a lasting, loving, harmonious marriage, start talking the language of love now, even when life gets tough. Let's get started together today. I have a limited number of spots on my calendar, but visit my calendar, find some time, and let's have a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabra. That was really great. I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question now, you can use the chat box or you can email info@savvyladies.org. And I'll read you a question we had come in already, which is, are prenups always 100% binding?
That's a great question. So I'm licensed to practice law in New York, so this answer will be really just limited to New York. Essentially, in New York is known for upholding prenuptial agreements. There are certain requirements that need to be met in terms of the document and the legality of it, how it's signed. That's signed in advance of the wedding. It's got to be signed by both people, notarized. It's highly recommended that you both be represented by counsel, because you want to make sure that everybody understands what they're signing. It's a really important legal document. And you also want to not have the impression that there's been some kind of force or duress or stress put on the person to sign it before marriage.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, are there laws in place that would protect my assets if I don't get a prenup? I've heard things about a post-nup, but is there anything that you can do after a marriage if you don't have a prenup in place?
Yes, the general answer is yes. So again, in New York, so if you don't have a prenup, there are certain assets that would automatically be considered to be separate or not a marital asset subject to division in a divorce. However, I'm going to caution you, there's a lot of caveats there, and there are many ways in which you can wind up commingling your funds with marital money, and it creates a bit of a problem in the future if you're going to try to differentiate between premarital money and marital money. If you are considering doing an agreement like this and you're already married, people do it all the time. And you're right, it's called a post-nuptial agreement. It's very similar, almost identical to a prenuptial agreement. The difference being that one is signed before marriage when you're two individuals, and the other is signed after marriage. And after marriage, you're a couple, you're married, and there's other legal distinctions there. You now have fiduciary responsibilities for one another that you didn't have as two single individuals. So that's pretty much all I could say right now. And if you want to speak further on that, I can certainly speak with you privately.
Okay. And the next question we have is, what's the average cost of a prenup? Would I need to get a specialized lawyer for this?
So that's a great question. It's always hard to answer a question of how much it's going to cost, because I think every attorney has their own ways of billing. Some lawyers bill hourly, some do come up with a flat fee arrangement. It's really something very specific to your attorney, and I would just recommend that you interview a few different people and then decide whom you're most comfortable working with. But it's usually a few $1,000s. In terms of, what was the second part of the question?
The second part was, would you need a specialized lawyer for this?
Right. That's a great question, because you definitely want someone who's familiar with the divorce laws in the state where you will be living, not necessarily in the state where you get married. So wherever it is that you're planning to live during your marriage, those are the laws that would be most applicable to you. So you would want to speak to a family attorney or a matrimonial attorney who's familiar with the divorce laws in that state.
Okay. And I believe this is the last question, which relates to what you just talked about. Are there state by state differences when it comes to prenups? Can you just talk a little bit about what you just addressed if you get married in one state and move to another?
Sure. So generally speaking, you would want to have a prenuptial agreement that addresses the laws in the state where you plan on marrying. If you might move to another state, there is language that we usually do include in prenuptial agreements. There's a law called conflict of laws. It's a little confusing, but essentially, if, for instance, someone were to get married in New York, they're living in New York, they have a prenup done in New York, and then they move to California, we could have a provision in the agreement that says, should we get divorced in the future and we're in another jurisdiction like California, that New York law would apply. And because of the conflict of law that we have in this country, the California law would be applying the New York law to that particular divorce in that circumstance. So there are ways around it, but I always recommend that before you relocate from one state to another, it'd be a good idea to consult with an attorney in the jurisdiction where you might be moving to before you do that, because if you need to either reaffirm or now do a post-nuptial agreement so that it's consistent with whatever your agreements were before marriage, you might need to consider doing that.
Okay. All right, well, those are all the questions we have, and we'll be sending out this link on the slide here for everyone if they weren't able to write it down. So I want to thank you again, Sabra, for a really great presentation, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today, and we hope you'll be joining us again. Thanks so much, Sabra.
Thank you, Maggie. This was really great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.